hello world, this is Attorney Angel and I'm your legal angel. Hi my fellow angels! I'm inside the car. Medyo hinihingal po because tinry po natin ulit maglakad sa oval ng UMAC. By the way, I hope that you're all doing well and that you're all staying safe. I think it's been 2 weeks since my last vlog. Anyway, vlog po ulit tayo kasi naging busy po tayo for the past 2 weeks. And sa totoo lang po, kung napansin nyo, wala nang masyadong puting buhok at umaliwalas na rin po ulit ang ating pakiramdam at pagbumuka. Dahil nakapagpagupit na po tayo for more than 1 year. Hindi pa ako nakapagpagupit at nakapagpatina. So, because I have completed my vaccination for the 2 doses and nakalipas na rin naman po yung panahon after the 2 doses, medyo naglakas loob na po tayo na magpunta sa salon at magpagupit at magpatina. Okay, I'm slowly getting back to my old happy self. Although there are times na sumasagi pa rin at dumadalaw ang anxiety and yung mga ilang symptoms ng COVID, but then kaya natin, laban lang. And with the Lord on our side, on my side, I know that I will not have to worry about anything. Sa kotse lang tayo yan. Okay. And actually, i-share ko lang sa inyo for this vlog yung audio recordings ko for international human rights that I did for my PIL class last year. Na-inspire po kasi ako because I attended the TRILA. Yeah, that's a training for teachers in international law, and I had the privilege to be able to join that webinar. So, gamitin ko naman po kahit papano at ma-share ko sa inyo, and I hope you will learn something from it. So, balik tayo to learning. Okay? Anyway, naghahanda na rin po ako na bumalik sa office after how many months of working from home. So I hope I can do more vlogs, and I hope that you will enjoy my vlogs. So as of the last count, we are already 570 now. Syempre, gusto ko ulit hingin ng tulong ninyo na sana maabot natin ng 1,000 subscribers and then the 400 watch hours if I'm not mistaken. So para rin po marami tayong matulungan. Okay po. So thank you very much for those who have already subscribed and hit the notification bell. Sorry. Hit the notification bell, okay, for updates. And also I'd like to do a shout out to the Pioneer 9, the first graduates of the University of Makati School of Law. Congratulations. And to the new 50 incoming full scholars of the UMAC SOL. Congratulations. And to my students, I hope you learned something from me in our subjects last semester, and hope to see you in future semesters, and hope to see you face to face when the pandemic ends, and that will be soon. Let's claim it because God will make it happen. All right, here's the audio recording of I did, okay, as I said, on international human rights law. Thanks. Okay, so let us proceed with a discussion. So, international human rights law. What will be the coverage of our discussion? So, I've listed down the scope of our discussion for this lecture from the historical background of human rights law, the international human rights law, the definition of human rights, the 3 generation of human rights. But of course, I know that you have discussed this already in your human rights class. But just to refresh your memory and to give you um, some more information, if in case it has not been in just in case it has not yet been discussed in your class, and also International Bill of Human Rights and other conventions, international implementation, UN Human Rights Commission, and the International Criminal Court. So the division will be like this. For this first part, I will be discussing historical background until half of International Bill of Human Rights. And for part two, I will continue with the other half of the International Bill of Human Rights until the International Criminal Court. Okay. For the historical background, what I can say is that you cannot separate the history of international human rights law with that of the history of human rights law per se. I hope you agree with me. Okay. Here, I have listed down major points in history which had a tremendous effect and influence on how human rights law and international human rights law developed through time. Okay? So please bear with me. Let's first go to the Cyrus cylinder. But just to mention, you know that the history of human rights law and international human rights law is quite a drama and a struggle. And history went through many things before we achieved peace and the means to true freedom and the respect for human rights. Okay, so the history dates back as far back as more than 2,500 years ago. So you can see the vast historical framework that human rights law went through. Okay, going back, in 539 BC, we had the Cyrus cylinder. If you remember in your world history, Cyrus the Great, he was the first king of ancient Persia. Okay, he can be credited with the Cyrus cylinder. If you have time to Google what this looks like, please Google it. Okay, the Cyrus cylinder is hailed as the first human rights charter, or it is recognized by many as the world's first charter of human rights. It is made out of baked clay cylinder. And on this baked clay cylinder or baked clay tablet, it contains proclamations of freedom and equality and the decrees made by Cyrus the Great. Okay, so jumping to another point in history, in 1215, we have the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta in English literally translates to the Great Charter. Now we go to England. Okay, the Magna Carta was said to was said to have established new rights, and it made the King of England subject to the law, because we know before that the royalty or the kings were the gods. Okay, but now because of the Great Charter or the Magna Carta, they were made subject to the law. Okay, jumping into another major point in history, in 1628, we have the Petition of Right. Okay, still in the United Kingdom, the Petition of Right set out the rights and liberties of the people as opposed to the British Crown, because as you know, the royalty ruled them. But here, it set out the rights and liberties of the people as opposed to the British Crown. Okay. Jumping to 1776, now we go to the United States. The United States Declaration of Independence. This proclaimed the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This was followed in 1787 by the Constitution of the United States of America, which was said to have formed the fundamental law of the U.S. federal system of government and defined the basic rights of citizens. And in 1789, in France this time, the Declaration of the Rights of Men and of the citizen. Sorry, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Okay, this established that all citizens are equal in the eyes of the law. Okay, going back to the US in 1791, the US Bill of Rights. This limited the powers of the federal government and protected the rights of all citizens, residents, and visitors on the United States of America territory. Then, followed by 1864, which is one of the highlights in the history of human rights law and international human rights law. The first Geneva Convention, which set the standards of international law. And in 1948, which we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or UDHR, which is the first charter proclaiming the 30 rights to which every human being is entitled. Okay. Now, as for the international human rights law history, it is said that the notion of universal human rights manifested itself as early as World War I through the support of then US President Woodrow Wilson. Okay, if you can see the picture, upper right hand corner, that's President Woodrow Wilson. But according to historians, it was not until after the end of World War II that the modern understanding of human rights began to flourish. And this was said to be propelled partly by Jacques Maritain, a French Catholic philosopher. Okay, it's difficult to pronounce his name. Okay, Jacques Maritain. Okay, his work included the examination of human dignity, which was praised by Pope Paul VI and was touted to be influential in the development and eventual creation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Okay. So next, how do you define human rights? It is quite difficult to give a definite meaning to human rights, but according to the book of Father Bernas on Public International Law, human rights in general terms are those inalienable and fundamental rights which are essential for life as human beings. But there is no agreement as to what these rights are. Okay? And there are different other meanings given to human rights. And I would like to share with you the definition that I learned when I attended the Social Justice Forum in 2018 or 2019. I think 2018 or 2019. I cannot remember the year. But I was able to take down notes regarding the discussion on human rights. So let me share the definition with you. Okay. So, human rights are the basic rights and freedoms to which human beings are entitled, often held to include the right to life and liberty, freedom of thought and expression, and equality before the law. It is said that human rights are based on the principle of respect for the individual. And the fundamental assumption is that each person is a moral and rational being who deserves to be treated with dignity. And they are called human rights because they are universal. Whereas nations or specialized groups enjoy specific rights that apply to them, human rights apply to everyone. Okay. That is a beautiful definition given to human rights. Okay. There are different views and or varying views or claims as to human rights, and there are different approaches to human rights. So among the approaches or views, we have the natural law approach, the positivist approach, and the Marxist approach. Okay, let's go back to natural law approach. The natural law approach was championed by Saint Thomas Aquinas and Jacques Maritain. 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 Sorry for the pronunciation. Okay. The natural law approach examines rights and obligations as emanating from the human essence. Okay. You know what natural law is, okay? Next, the positivist approach. This approach was espoused by Jeremy Bentham and Austin. Forgot the first name of Austin. Okay. And this positivist approach sees human rights as rights granted by those in power rather than emanating from within every man, which is totally opposite of the natural law approach. And we also have the Marxist approach, okay? The Marxist approach from Karl Marx. Okay. This approach made a distinction between human rights and political rights. Okay? It put a premium on the rights of the workers and viewed the rights of persons as indivisible from that of society as a whole. Okay? You want to read more about these approaches, please do so. Okay. Now we go to the 3 generations of human rights, which of course you have already learned in your human rights class. Okay? But this is just a review and to refresh your memory. So as written by Father Bernas, literature now speaks of 3 generations of human rights. Okay? Historically, these 3 generations of human rights were classified by the Czech jurist Vasak. Okay. The first section of the International Institute of the Human Rights in Strasbourg. Okay. These follow the 3 watchwords of the French Revolution. And what are these 3 watchwords? Very important words. Liberty, equality, and fraternity. Okay, remember that. Okay, let's go to the first generation of human rights. The first generation of human rights, as you know, deal essentially with liberty and participation in political life. So this can be found in Articles 3 to 21 of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the ICCPR, or the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Okay. Now, the second generation human rights. These are related to equality and fundamentally social, economic, and cultural in nature, and are fundamentally social, economic, and cultural in nature. Okay? These are found in Articles 22 to 27 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, or ICECSR. Okay, and the third generation human rights, as you know, are those rights that go beyond the mere civil and social rights as expressed in many progressive documents of international law, including the 1972 Stockholm Declaration of the UN Conference on the Human Environment, the 1992 Rio Declaration on Environment and Development. Okay. So now we go to the International Bill of Human Rights. So the UN became the center of development of international human rights, as you know, but the United Nations Charter provisions on human rights were only preliminary. Okay? This led to the development of the International Bill of Human Rights. So the International Bill of Human Rights consists of the following. So we have the Universal Declaration of Human rights, I was not able to provide that in the list. Please provide that in your list. We also have, as I mentioned, the ICCPR, or the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICESCR, or the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the two optional protocols to the ICCPR. Okay. With respect to the human rights under the UN Charter, or the United Nations Charter, the protection of human rights is one of the keys to the establishment of the United Nations. Okay. History would tell us that the UN was the world's reaction to the Holocaust and the other atrocities by the Nazis during World War II. So under the United Nations Charter, or the UN Charter, the protection of human rights can be found in the following provisions. Okay, so you can look it up in your United Nations Charter. Under Article 1, Paragraph 3, in which one of the purposes of the United Nations is to achieve international cooperation in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. Another one, Article 55C, the UN shall promote universal respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. And another one, Article 56, all members pledge themselves to take joint and separate action in cooperation with the organization for the achievement of the above-mentioned purposes. Okay. So we go to the first Bill of Human Rights, International Bill of Human Rights, which is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Okay. Or for brevity, let us refer to it as UDHR. Okay. This was adopted by the UN General Assembly as Resolution 217A3. And this was adopted on December 10, 1948. It was proclaimed as a common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations, to the end that every individual and every organ of society, keeping this declaration constantly in mind, shall strive by teaching and education to promote respect for these rights and freedoms, and by progressive measures, national and international, to secure the universal and effective recognition and observance both among the peoples of member states themselves and among the peoples of territories under their jurisdiction. Okay. The declaration consists of the preamble and then 30 articles. Okay. That is why they said that there are 30 rights under the UDHR. Okay. And this set forth the human rights and fundamental freedoms to which all men and women everywhere in the world are entitled without any discrimination. Okay. Let me just mention the 30 rights. Okay. Okay. The right to be born free and equal, to be equal. The right against discrimination, the right to life, right against slavery, right against torture, rights wherever you go or no matter where you go. Okay, rights, right of equality before the law, human rights protected by law, no unfair detainment, the right to trial, uh, innocent until proven guilty, right to privacy, freedom of movement, right to seek a safe place to live, right to a nationality, right to marriage and family, right to your own things, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, right to public assembly, right to democracy, social security, workers' rights, the right to play, food and shelter for all, right to education, copyright, fair and free world, responsibility, and the last, but not the least, number 30, that no one can take away your human rights. Okay. So Article 1 is a very powerful article. It lays down the philosophy in which the declaration is based. Okay, so let me read to you Article 1. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Okay? So this article defines the basic assumptions of the Declaration that the right to liberty and equality is man's birthright. Okay? It's a man's birthright and it cannot be alienated. And that because man is a rational and moral being, he is different from other creatures on earth. And therefore, man is entitled to certain rights and freedoms which other creatures do not enjoy. Okay, remember that. Um, okay, the UDHR is said to be the world's premier human rights instrument. And in the opening paragraph, again, let me read to you recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Very powerful words. Okay. Now, there is a question on whether or not the UDHR constitutes a binding legal document for the members of the international community. Okay. There are different views regarding this question. Okay. So one view is that as a resolution of the General Assembly, it is not per se legally binding. At the time of its passage, many of the states which voted to pass the declaration regarded it as a statement of aspiration rather than a legal obligation. But there is, however, another view that since 1948, the declaration has become binding as a new rule of customary international law. Okay. And those finding the legal obligation point to the Proclamation of Tehran, which was adopted in Iran in 1968 by the International Conference on Human Rights. And in this conference, they agreed that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states a common understanding of the peoples of the world concerning the inalienable and inviolable rights of all members of the human family and constitutes an obligation for the members of the international community. Okay. So if you summarize the rights included in the UDHR, you will find the first and second generation human rights. Okay. You can cluster them into first generation rights or civil and political rights, and the second generation rights on the economic, social, and cultural rights. Okay. So there is another question on whether or not there are limitations on the exercise of the rights under the UDHR. Okay. Yes, there are limitations, and you can find the limitations in Article 29 of the UDHR, particularly in paragraph 3 and paragraph 2. So in paragraph 3 muna, sige. In paragraph 3, it states that these rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. Okay? Then the other one in paragraph 2 of Article 29, it states that in the exercise of his rights and freedoms, everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as are determined by law, solely for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others, and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and the general welfare in a democratic society. Okay. So we will stop here for part one of our international human rights law discussion. So next meeting, we will continue with the ICCPR, ICESCR, the other conventions, and then the international interpretation of human rights, the UN Human Rights Commission, and then the ICC. Okay, so with that, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you learned something. We'll continue next week, and don't forget to glorify God with a grateful heart. Thank you.
This is Attorney Angel, and I'm your legal angel.